Alrighty, captains, and welcome to another Wire project breakdown. So you may have seen this sort of trails look from a couple of stills I put in the Wire Facebook group. Now this is a Wire patch I built before. It's called Basic Extrude V2. And what it does is use the feedback function inside of Wire to give us these nice trails that we can decide to animate and move around. So jumping straight away into how this is set up. So this is a PNG. This is the precinct logo for a new venue that's opening in Adelaide, Australia. I'm just going to throw a light colored background in so you can see the default look a bit easier. So dragging this in, dropping it onto our PNG, we can see that it's starting to work. It's starting to draw this depth effect coming in. Let's have a look at some of these parameters that are inside. So we can drop it there. We have an opacity to bring this in and out. We have an offset X, which allows us to move the trails left and right, and you can animate this as you see fit. The offset Y, by default, I've got it moving slightly down to sort of show some depth. You can zero it out so it goes straight back. And again, you can animate this up and down. Rotation, similar again. We can just rotate these trails around. You can get some pretty extreme rotations. But yeah, that's another thing you can animate. The depth here basically shows how far each one is pushed back. It also pushes them forward. Now it's a bit hard to see here, but we can actually jump over to our next thing here, our initial scale, and bring this in. Now the reason I used initial scale was because sometimes you'll see when you clip the edges, it'll leave a harsh edge. So on higher resolutions, you may want to drop your initial scale down and then scale it back up. Next, we have our outline alpha. Now the outline is that black outline that's here by default. And then the thickness, so we can turn it off again or make it very thick. We can change the outline color by this color picker here. So we can actually come in and actually animate this through if we wanted to, or just pick a different color. Reset that. We also have the option here, which is the toggle box, to override the color of the PNG or the video. That basically just floods the alpha with another color. Turn that off. And right down the bottom here, I've just got a little checkbox, which is my Blurple Trails preset effect. Which is one I use a lot, which is just a really quick, just set it up and forget it. This was hard-coded inside of Wire. So that's how the basics sort of look. Let's have a look at some of the other things we can do inside here. Now this look here, if I want to turn off the effect, is basically just moving side to side using the transform here with a little envelope modifier going on. Putting the effect back on, you'll see that our trails are moving downwards with a 7.5 amount. So we're just basically moving these down. We can make them go faster or make them go slower. We have no offset in X. Our depth is set to 1, so there's nothing moving backwards in space. There's nothing moving forwards in space. It's just moving directly downwards. Initial scale is 1, outline is alpha is 1, but our outline color is actually cycling through the palette. So normally you'd find if you do an outline color, it'd just be basic and just be picking one color. So you say you pick a blue. But what we've done here is we've actually gone for the palette look. So here's how it would normally look for you. You'd be able to pick a color. If you click the palette, you actually click this little P and bring up all of the presets that come with Resolume. Now, these are some of the ones that I have as well on my own. But if I wanted to say, select the plasma look, and then come across and click this little cog and hit timeline, it'll actually cycle through all the colors in that plasma look. Now, one thing I have also turned on here in this cog under animation setting is color interpolation. If I turn that off, you will see that it's actually going to be quite like jarring between when the colors start and stop. So interpolation is good to have on. And that's basically how we can make things flow downwards using the color palette. So next one here, this is actually running the text animator. So let's turn the wire patch off. Now this text animator is basically just moving things from front to back, just animating a scale on and a little position downwards. But the cool thing is because we've got our trails effect, we can make this a really dynamic wireframe sort of look. Again, we're cycling through a color palette. We've got our offset being more vertical in the upwards direction. So it's actually pushing a lot further upwards, giving that sort of feeling like it's coming forwards and the camera's moving away from it. We're overriding the logo color instead of being a white with like a very dark purple. And that's one where we can use our text animator. Another one with the text animator is the dangle effect. Now this one's really easy to recreate. I'm going to do it for you here. So if we come in here and go text, we have text animator. Let's go to our dangle effect, close that off and bring this in. It'll just say Resolume, but let's give it a second line, wire. We're just going to center this up, make it larger, and lift it upwards. So if we go and grab our effect, we look for basic extrude and just drop it on, we're immediately given this sort of trails look, and we can see the edges sort of start leaving this nice look. Let's make the edges a little bit thinner so we can really show off those trails. Now to match the look we had in the version above it, which was here, we just want to come in. We want to say our outline color is going to maybe something like a dark purple. And our logo override color is going to be something like a blue. Now what we did in here is we had a small palette change. So we came through. To make your own palettes, you can actually right click on the palette and go remove all. And you can drag from your color picker to select another color. So let's just grab that color, drag that in. Now if I go my timeline, it's going to jump between these two colors. Again, that's a bit abrupt. So animation setting, color interpretation, and maybe make this 1 second. And let's make it bounce so it's a little smoother. And that's how quick and easy it was to recreate this look here. Okay, the next one we're going to be doing is using actually a static text. This is not an animated text, but we're using the stripper effect here to sort of mask it. So stepping backwards, we take off the bloom, we take off the effect, and this is the look we're getting. So again, take the stripper part out. Basic text, we can change this to whatever we want. Hello world. We throw the basic extrude back on, and this is the look we're going to get here. The way this works is we've set the offset in Y to 0, so it's no longer moving up or down. It's just directly going backwards. We've got a really fast cycle between these colors, and we've got our logo being a darker purple. Now, the cool thing about having this masked look here is it leaves chunks in behind. So that's one we can do it there, or we can do it in double height as well. Cool. All right, we're chewing through a bit of time here, but jumping into another generator. So the rings look. This is something that's built into Resolume. Most people have seen this. It's just the rings that alternate in different directions. But when we add this effect on here, now we're starting to see this really cool sort of tunnel, sort of wireframe look. Now, how are we getting this going? We're actually animating our X offset here by using a slightly modified sine wave and just punching it left and right really quickly. We have the depth set to 0.96. So there's a bit more gap between each of these groups as they go backwards. Our color is cycling through very hard edges as it moves forward. So you can see it goes from our magenta to our teal, and it moves very quickly through the purple and blue as it does a transition there. And again, we're just doing our override as black for our logo. We can turn this off and it'll be like a much lighter look, but I really do like the really punchy looks here. Next, we can do something really simple with the lines effect. So if we look here, we have, and we turn off the basic extrude, it's just our 45-degree lines. So we can bring in our look here, which is just going to be moving it slightly in our rotation and slightly in our depth with the color chase. Now the lines look is something we can just grab here. So if we go into our sources, so our lines, 45-degree pan, let's just recreate this look. So by default, these lines are very thick. Let's turn our width down a bit. Let's go to our effect, drag this in. Immediately we're starting to see something. So let's make our outline thickness a little bit smaller. And just for the sake of it, let's just throw our Blurple Trails on. And in a couple of clicks, we have this almost iridescent sort of dancing look. We can make our width a little smaller and the amount a bit more. So we can create this really cool wire look. Maybe make the depth a bit further back so there's more separation. Let them coming forward a bit. Yeah, so just adding a simple effect, turning on a preset, and there we go. Okay, this is actually using the shaper generator. And what we're doing here is, in our effect, we're just moving our offset X and our offset Y just along different times. So it's sort of like making an orbit around the outside. We're just jumping between our different palettes to make it interesting. And we've made our outline very thin. So if I want to turn this off to show you what it looks like, it's just going to be the standard shaper look. But turning it back on, we get this tunnel. And finally, this doesn't only work with generators. We can actually feed a video in here. Here's an old render from my university days, the nightclub. So you can see here that it's leaving trails quite nicely with video as well. There is a very, very, very thin outline here. If we turn the outline up far too much, you will start to see it just starting to look a little bit naff. So turn our outline all the way off pretty much, and it leaves some nice trails. So yeah, that's how everything was built inside of, how it's all set up inside of Arena to get this sort of look here. And now we're going to be jumping into Wire to see how the effect was actually processed. Alrighty, captains. So here we are inside of Wire. I've got the dashboard open here so we can have all of our parameters available. I'm just using the Wire logo at the moment. We could do the test card. The test card's not going to show so well, but the Wire logo is a good option. So let's have a look at how this is built. Before I go any further, everything in orange, so all of this region down here, the bottom selection, and some of these gates and transforms are part of the Blurple effect. So if I put that Blurple Trails on here, that's part of that preset. So what we were doing with this is basically recreating some of those sine wave effects inside of Resolume before, but I've just done them on a quick and easy tick box so I can always access the same look. So let's step through how we go this. We have on one side all of our exposed inputs. So we have a lot of exposed floats. We have some texture in here, which is going to grab the image that we drop this effect onto. We've got an initial scale. We've got our colors. We've got our thicknesses, and we've got like our override logo style. So first things first, we want to scale our logo. Let's go into our dashboard here. The initial scale, called as it is done right at the start here, because if we were to make this full size like it is here, and then come to the end, for example, let's just demonstrate this, and we were to insert a transform node here. If I made this something like, say, 0.5, 0.5, you'll notice that the effect stops. So even if I make the initial scale larger and smaller, it gets cut off. And that's definitely not ideal for what we want to do. So let's just delete that. So our initial scale is what makes our logo larger. And we do that right at the start. So we can even, if you wanted to, make it a sort of pulse effect. So after our initial scale, we're doing our logo override. So the way we do this is using a threshold. It's pretty simple. We make our bottom color black, and we make our top color, which is going to be whatever we set our logo color to. So as you can see here, our logo color down the bottom is our color 1, and our logo override here, this Boolean, feeds into our bypass node. Now, most of these effects you'll see, actually, if we click on a node here, will have a bypass amount. If that's not there by default, you can come to visibility and turn bypass on in here. Now, the reason we're using a 1 - X node is because normally when we want to say we want to override something, we check it on, that'll make it a 1, and that'll actually turn on the bypass. Now we want to make it so when we click this button, the bypass sort of turns off. It's bypassed by default. So we want to make this a negative value here. So basically whenever this is clicked on, it becomes a 0. And whenever it's off, it becomes a 1. So that's a one take X there. Next, we're dealing with our outline node. So let's grab this line here and trace it back. So this is going to take an input from our scale logo, and it's going to say, all right, we want to grab an edge detection node. We're using a bunch of functions here, and our offset, basically how wide this is going to be in pixels, both X and Y, is based off this multiply, which we are getting from our outline thickness exposed parameter. So we come to our dashboard, outline thickness is going to modify this value. So if we come here, we can see the outline thickness here is 4.72, which is 4 times this value here, because unsurprisingly, we have a multiplier that's taking in the value and multiplying it by 4. So the next thing we're doing here is our edge detection is going to, if we take the pin off, the edge detection is going to give us by default, a white border with a black internal. Now we only want the border, but not the inside. So the way we get around that is by using an auto mask node. So this auto mask node here is basically the contrast is turned all the way up. If we invert that, we will actually trim off the edge and just get the internals, but we just want the edge here. So that's basically going to knock out anything that's black, which is really useful for this particular effect. And next, we're going to feed this into a colorize node. Now, the color, as you can see here, if we follow this back, is going to be our outline color. So if I wanted to say, just by default, change this to something like a light magenta, we are now grabbing our auto masked outline and colorizing it to be that internal color. Now here's where I have a gate basically interrupting the flow, because when I go and click on my preset down here, I actually override that color by some fancy colors I'm cycling through down the bottom here, which we don't need to worry about. Let's turn that off. So ignoring this gate exists, we go from our colorize into our outline blend. Now, if I click here, you'll see that it takes one input from our color override here. So if our color override is not on, it'll take the raw image in and feed it in, and it's going to overlay the outline on top of that. Now, this is important because the input for the bottom one is for our full color image, and the input for our top one is coming from our outline. Alrighty, now this is where the really interesting part happens. So as I said before, the feedback node is what does all of this. So not really a feedback node, but a feedback system. So the difference between this look and this look is every frame this renders. And again, you can ignore this transform here. So every frame that is rendered here, it gets sent out. It'll go all the way into a delay node, which will wait a second. So it will wait a frame. And during that frame, it will transform this image. Now, these values here, translation, scale, and rotation, are inside of our dashboard as our offset X and Y, our initial scale, our depth, and our rotation. So you can think of this as every frame, it is going to add 8 pixels, say 10 pixels in X. It is going to add 20 pixels upwards in Y. It is going to add 0.1 of a degree, or like 360 degrees times 0.01 in rotation, and it'll change the scale each frame. So, and that's going to then send to an output. Now, to make this a little bit easier to follow, what I'm going to do is actually unpack this feedback node, so it's a little bit easier to follow here. So our input comes from our outline blend into our video mixer. I said to ignore this node, but I'm going to put it in line anyway. So this is the secondary transform for our preset, but we're not going to worry about that. We then run this into our delay. Our delay runs into the transform that does everything going on. So after a frame, it does the transform. And this then feeds back into the video mixer here, which is our layer 1, and we can turn that off. Now, if we were to flip the order here, at the moment we have our image that's coming in from our video mixer here as our solid image coming into the top layer, and our bottom layer is what is actually coming in from our transform node. And we get that to appear as what is behind. So these effects are coming from behind. If we did this the other way around, and this was actually in the top layer and this was in the bottom layer, all of our trails would appear on top of our original image, which is not the look I'm going for, but it may be the look you want to go for. So To make it a little bit cleaner, I'm just going to set this back up the way I had it before, just so it flows a little bit easier. And our output, as most of the wire patches is just a texture out. So this texture out, we can set like a resolution on it, but at the moment it's just grabbing the resolution of whatever the look is outputting. So let's maybe jump in now. Let's just reset some of these dashboard amounts, and let's jump into roughly what the effect that our blurple look is creating. Let's make our depth a little bit further in. Change our outline color to black for now. So let's have a look at this blurple override. So this is being triggered off by a node down here, which is basically just going to be a Boolean in. Now, when this is clicked, it's going to send a 1 value out. And when it's not clicked, it's going to send a 0. Now at the top, I said to ignore this gate. This gate's really important because when that particular Boolean is checked, this gate looks for true or false. If it is true, it takes the output from this drop shadow down here and replaces it on top of this one that's here, which is our normal outline. So that's the first step here. What we're also getting down here is we have, again, this Boolean coming in, which is a hub. I've gone and put a pixel gradient on. Now, if you're unaware of pixel gradients, it's like a way of creating a normal map from an image. And this just gives it a nice little bit of a rounded edge you might see in the blurple look compared to the normal one. I put a bright contrast on top of that, so we're only going to get the real sharp sort of rounded edges. I've used a mask, which is taking in our auto mask white up here. So we're only getting, it's kind of hard to see here, but we're only getting the rounded edges appearing inside of the mask look. We're throwing a colorize on top of that. Again, it's just blue at the moment. I'm throwing a hue rotate on top of that with a sign modifier. And that sign modifier is basically moving 0.5 in the color wheel. So it's just basically orbiting around this blue color. And I've thrown a drop shadow on there. So a little subtle purple drop shadow, when combined with these colors here, gives it more of an iridescent sort of look. So if I want to pin this here, and in our dashboard, let's just override the color, you'll notice that we're getting a really nice sort of almost shiny effect coming through on our Blurple Trails look. Alrighty, so that's how it's made. And again, the big heavy lifter in all of this is using feedback systems. So let's just quickly do a really simple example of how they would work. If you haven't seen the Resolume training on instances, let's just unhook our output. Let's just come in here and go for a rectangle. Let's go a shape render. Connect that in. And we want to have, let's go about texture out down here. We want to have a video mixer, if I can spell, in. And then we want to create our feedback loop. So let's first say we want to drag out and go video and transform. You want to take this output of the transform into the input of this video node. And we have this delay. All right. We can then stack this above each other just so it's a little bit easier to follow. Now we take the output as video mixer into texture out. If I was to come into this rotation mode here, and I want to rotate it slightly, it's probably not the easiest to see. Let's throw another node in here. So we can insert nodes by doing this, go to shape, go to edge. And let's change this to 0.01. And now you'll see that we're starting to draw our shape. So that's how feedback works inside of Wire. It's just going to disappear away itself. And as you can see, that is the main defining effect that all of this is built on top of. So if I was to unhook this, we can probably delete that section there, drag it back in, connect it back up. And that is how we get these trails look. And again, this is just the animation that's happening inside the Blurple preset. All of the other animation you would have seen before is actually happening inside of Resolume, and it's been exposed that way so people could have a lot more control if they wanted it to wave up and down a bit more, or they wanted it to maybe pulse side to side like that snake sort of look they were going before. You know, it's just giving people a lot more options at showtime. Anyway, thanks for tuning in on this. I hope this has been super useful, and yeah, good luck with all your shows coming forward.